There's a silence that doesn't come from peace, but from power. The kind that falls over a room, not because everything is calm, but because something greater just entered. That's what it feels like when God speaks. It's not noise, it's not volume, it's something deeper, heavier. When he speaks, time slows down, thoughts scatter, hearts pound, and everything else that once felt loud suddenly has nothing more to say. Scripture tells us that his voice is like thunder, like many waters, like a trumpet that splits the sky. But it can also come as a whisper, softer than breath. Loud or quiet, it always carries weight. It commands attention. It changes the room, and it changes the listener. Sometimes we think we want to hear him until he actually speaks, because his voice doesn't flatter, it doesn't entertain, it doesn't echo what we already believe. It pierces, it divides, it reveals. When God speaks, you don't get to hold on to your illusions, you don't get to pretend anymore. You stand or you fall. And yet when you hear it, you know it's not just sound, it's presence, the kind that doesn't ask permission, the kind that reminds you this is not just a belief system, this is not just religion, this is real, and he is here. You may have never heard him audibly, but you felt it, in a sentence that stopped you cold, in a moment when truth hit harder than you expected, in a scripture that suddenly cut through everything else. That was him. He still speaks, and when he does, everything stops. God doesn't speak to impress, he speaks to transform. His voice doesn't just make noise, it makes decisions clear. It doesn't leave you the same, it never has. When he spoke, light appeared. When he spoke, the seas parted. When he spoke, the dead rose. And when he speaks now, something inside of you stirs, something that doesn't respond to anything else. You can hear sermons every week, read scriptures, listen to worship music, but when God himself speaks, truly speaks, you'll know. Because it bypasses your ears and goes straight to the center of who you are. It breaks through pride. It cuts through shame. It confronts fear without apology. And yet somehow it never pushes you away. It draws you closer. That's the tension in his voice, holy yet tender, immense yet intimate, powerful enough to shake the mountains, gentle enough to whisper to your heart. Sometimes he shouts through storms. Sometimes he waits until the noise dies down, then says just one word. But that one word changes everything. You may not realize it in the moment. You may just feel unsettled, moved, undone. But later you'll trace it back, not to a person, not to emotion, but to him. Because the voice of God leaves fingerprints on the soul. And the truth is, you've probably already heard him, just not in the way you expected. Not in thunder or fire, but in conviction, in clarity, in the stillness where your excuses stopped working. That was him. The voice that doesn't flatter but frees. The voice that doesn't echo you but invites you to follow. He speaks still. The question is, are you still enough to listen? When God speaks, something deep within us knows we're not hearing just sound, we're hearing authority. Not human wisdom, not religious words, but something older, truer, weightier than anything we've known before. That's why his voice has always unsettled people. Because it doesn't just tell us something, it shows us ourselves. In Scripture, no one heard God speak and remained comfortable. Adam hid. Moses trembled. Elijah covered his face. Saul fell to the ground, blinded by glory. John collapsed as though dead, not because God intended to destroy them, but because his voice removed all illusions. When he speaks, he reveals what's in the room, and more than that, he reveals what's in you. We want to hear from God until he actually speaks, because when he does, it demands a response. His voice is never casual. It calls you to decide, to turn, to surrender. And if there are parts of your life you'd rather keep hidden, his voice will press gently but firmly into them. Not to shame you, but to free you from what's been controlling you. That's the beauty and the fear of it. His voice doesn't flatter. It doesn't echo your pride. It doesn't reassure your ego. It speaks truth, and truth isn't always easy to hear. But it's always good. It's always holy. And it always carries the power to change you. What's dangerous isn't that he speaks too loudly. It's that we've grown so used to noise we can't tell when it's him. We hear inspiration, emotion, even conviction, and we move on. But when God speaks, truly speaks, your soul knows. You feel exposed but not abandoned. Convicted but not condemned. It's not shame, it's clarity. And that clarity is a gift. The most tragic thing you can do is ignore it, because the longer you push it away, the easier it gets to pretend you didn't hear anything at all. And over time, that holy voice becomes just another sound in the background. Not because God stopped speaking, but because your heart stopped listening. So when something inside you stirs, when you feel like a truth just struck deeper than logic can explain, pause. Don't dismiss it. Don't escape it. It could be him. And if it is, that's not just information, that's invitation. And nothing is more urgent than a moment like that. We like to think that if God really spoke to us, we would hear him. That if he thundered from the sky or whispered in our dreams, we'd notice. But the truth is, God often speaks in ways we don't expect. And because we've trained ourselves to only hear what we want, we miss him. Not because he's silent, but because we're distracted. God doesn't only speak through miracles or supernatural encounters. He speaks through his word, through conviction, through silence that suddenly feels heavy with meaning. He speaks through a moment that stops us in our tracks, through a line in a sermon that hits deeper than it should, through a quiet nudge in the soul we try to brush off. And every time his voice carries the same goal, not just to inform us but to bring us closer. But closeness requires response, and that's where we often hesitate. Because to listen, to truly listen, means we have to stop moving. We have to quiet the world, turn off the noise, and ask a terrifying question. What is God trying to say to me? It means being open to correction, willing to surrender control, ready to be led where we wouldn't have gone on our own. The reason many don't hear him isn't because he's not speaking. It's because they've already decided what they want him to say. And when his voice challenges that, they assume it's not him. But God doesn't speak to confirm our plans. He speaks to reveal his will. He doesn't speak to make us feel comfortable. He speaks to make us holy. That's why when he speaks, everything stops. Because in that moment, something greater than your to-do list, your plans, your opinions, or even your pain is speaking. Something eternal is touching what's temporary. And when that happens, you can't keep living like you did before. You either move toward him or you harden your heart. So if your soul feels interrupted lately, if something keeps tugging at your attention, if the truth is getting harder to ignore, that might not be anxiety, that might not be coincidence. It might be his voice, soft, steady, and full of purpose. And if it is, you don't want to miss what he's saying. God's voice is never random. He doesn't speak just to fill the silence. Every word has weight. Every whisper carries purpose. He speaks to call, to correct, to restore, to awaken. And when he speaks to you, it's not by accident, it's not general, it's not vague, it's personal. That's what makes his voice so different from every other. It doesn't just land on the ears, it lands on the soul. It reaches places you've tried to keep closed. It touches wounds you've hidden for years. It confronts the pride you've dressed as strength, the fear you've disguised as logic. His voice sees through you and still stays. But that kind of encounter demands something in return. Because once you hear him, you can't pretend you didn't. You can't unknow the truth. You can't go back to the way things were without knowing you're resisting something real. That's why many walk away, not because they didn't believe it was God, but because they weren't ready to follow. God doesn't force you. He doesn't shout you into submission. He speaks and then he waits for your response, for your yes, for your surrender. Some hear him in the fire of crisis when everything else falls apart. Some hear him in stillness when the noise finally fades. Some hear him through pain, loss, beauty, joy. But however he speaks, the call is the same. Come to me, come now, don't wait. And that's the tension, isn't it? You think you'll have more time. You think he'll speak again. But you don't know when he'll speak like this again, or if he will. You don't know how many times you can turn away before you stop hearing him altogether, not because he gives up, but because your heart grows too hard to notice. So when God speaks, whether loud or soft, don't delay, don't explain it away, don't push it off, because his voice doesn't come to entertain you, it comes to rescue you. And rescue always demands a choice. When God speaks, he doesn't just give information, he offers life. His voice doesn't come to decorate your day with inspiration, it comes to pull you out of darkness. It carries power, not just poetry. It carries change, not just comfort. That's why the enemy works so hard to keep you distracted, to drown his voice beneath the noise, to fill your life with constant sound, so you never get still enough to notice that something greater has been calling you. Because if you ever heard God clearly, everything else would lose its grip. Every lie, every fear, every excuse would start to crumble. The voice of God doesn't just convict, it creates. It created the world. It created order from chaos. And it still creates today, healing where there was pain, clarity where there was confusion, hope where there was despair. Maybe that's what he's doing in you right now. Maybe that stirring you feel isn't just emotion, it's a shift, a shaking, a quiet moment where something eternal is trying to break through the surface of your everyday life. And deep down, you know it. You've known it for a while. You've felt the ache for more, the longing to stop pretending, the desire to be clean, to be real, to be whole. And in the background of all of that, his voice. Calling not with condemnation but with clarity, not with shame but with invitation. He's not yelling to scare you, he's speaking to save you. And the question is no longer, is God speaking? The question is, will you respond before it's too late? You may not get thunder, you may not get lightning. But if you're quiet enough, humble enough, honest enough, you will hear him. And when you do, the only thing that should remain is surrender. There is no such thing as hearing God's voice and remaining unchanged. When he speaks, something inside you shifts. Your illusions lose their hold. Your excuses sound thinner. Your distractions suddenly feel empty. His words don't just land, they divide. They cut between what's true and what's comfortable. And you're left with a choice, obey or harden. Some try to walk away from it. They say, it was just emotion, just a moment, just a thought. But even when they say that, they know, deep down they know it was more. Because God's voice doesn't just stir your mind, it stirs your eternity, and you can't unhear it. You can't fully forget it. You can only resist it or follow it. And that's where the weight of this moment settles. Because when God speaks, he's not offering you more religion. He's offering you rescue. And rescue is always urgent. Not because he's impatient, but because your heart is fragile. Every time you silence his voice, your heart hardens just a little more. Every time you turn away, it becomes easier not to return. That's why Scripture says, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your heart. Because there comes a point when you no longer hear him, not because he's done speaking, but because you've trained yourself not to listen. Don't let that happen to you. If something inside you is stirring, if truth is pressing closer, if conviction is rising, don't run from it. Let it in. Let it do its work. Let it draw you to the place your soul has always needed, the presence of the one who made you and who still wants you. He is speaking now. And what you do next matters forever. Not everyone hears God's voice as thunder. Some hear it as a whisper. Some hear it in the middle of their rebellion. Others hear it in their grief. But for those who truly listen, that voice becomes the anchor they didn't know they were missing. Because when God speaks, he doesn't just reveal what's wrong. He reminds you of what's true. Yes, his voice convicts, but it also comforts. It may break your pride, but it also heals your wounds. It cuts deep, but only to reach the places that have been bleeding for far too long. When God speaks, it isn't just to expose you, it's to embrace you. And maybe you need to hear that today. Maybe you've only imagined God's voice as something harsh and distant, as if he only speaks to condemn. But the truth is, the same voice that called Lazarus from the grave still calls to you. The same voice that calmed the sea still whispers, "Peace, be still," to the storm inside your heart. God doesn't only speak to point out what's broken. He speaks to declare what can be redeemed. He says, you are not too far. You are not forgotten. You are not unloved. He says, come home. And when you finally believe that, everything else begins to quiet down. Because nothing silences fear like hearing the voice of the one who created you. Nothing makes lies crumble like the sound of truth. And once you know his voice, really know it, you'll never settle for anything less. The world is loud, your past is loud, your doubts are loud, but he still speaks louder, not in volume but in power, not in force but in love. And when he speaks, everything else stops. Maybe you've wondered what it would be like to hear God speak. You've imagined thunder, flashes of light, something undeniable. But sometimes it's not like that at all. Sometimes it's a quiet moment that catches your breath, a sentence that feels like it was aimed directly at your soul, a stillness that makes everything else feel small, and maybe that's what's happening right now. Maybe the stirring in your chest isn't just emotion. Maybe the weight you're feeling isn't pressure, it's presence. Maybe the thoughts you can't shake, the peace you can't explain, the ache you can't ignore is Him, speaking, reaching, calling. Not because you're perfect, not because you finally got it together, but because He loves you and He still wants you. God doesn't speak to impress you. He speaks to invite you, to pull you closer, to give you truth you can't find anywhere else. And when He speaks, you can't stay the same. You either walk toward Him or turn away. But if you turn now, if you pause, breathe, and truly listen, you'll hear it for what it is. Not judgment, not guilt, but mercy still being offered, still open, still for you. So don't just scroll away. Don't bury what just moved inside of you. You didn't land here by accident. You didn't feel this by chance. If this reached something deep in you, if it felt like more than words, subscribe to this channel. Because this is more than content. It's a place for those who are still listening, for hearts that want to stay soft, for people who know they've wandered but still want to come home. You're not too far, you're not too late, and the voice that calls you now still waits for your answer.